A complete unknown is receiving a lot of praise, but is it worthy of that praise? Let's talk about it. Now, I know I'm a little late on this review, so if you've already seen the movie, let me know your thoughts on it in the comments, and be sure to like, subscribe, comment, do all that jazz that YouTubers tell you to do. But without further ado, let's jump right into this thing and talk about A Complete Unknown. So this was, of course, directed by James Mangold, who also did Logan, which is a movie I very much love, and he also directed Ford versus Ferrari. So he has a phenomenal track record, so it's very understandable that this movie is getting lots of praise because James Mangold is a very talented director. And in his newest movie, we follow the story of Bob Dylan, played by Timothee Chalamet, as we see his meteoric rise in the folk genre and also see his effect on not only music, but the culture during that time period as well. Getting right into the good, and the first thing I have here is Timothee Chalamet and really the performances across the board. They were really good in this movie. Now, I don't know much about Bob Dylan at all. I really only know the name. So I don't know if Timothee Chalamet's portrayal of him was accurate, but what I can say, whether it was an accurate portrayal or not, the performance was great. So if you are a Bob Dylan fan and you're watching this, I'd be really curious to know your thoughts on Timothee Chalamet's performance, on whether it was accurate or not, and if you thought it was good as well. There was this mystery about his performance that I thought was pretty interesting, and the film really dives into that aspect of Bob Dylan's character. We get to know who Bob Dylan is in this movie, but we really don't get to get close to him and start peeling back those layers of his character. And that very much shows in this film, as Bob Dylan is very mysterious about his past in this thing, and we get this whole spiel about how he grew up in a carnival and whatnot. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we do get to know Bob Dylan in this film, but we don't really get to know Bob Dylan, if you know what I mean. And I know some people might have a problem with that, but for me, if that's what Bob Dylan was actually like in real life, if he's more of a mysterious guy, then I'm okay with it. Now, do I think his performance was Oscar worthy? I mean, I wouldn't mind him getting a nomination for this, but I would prefer that he gets a nomination for his role in Dune Part 2, because not only is that my favorite performance from him, I also think it's his best performance of his career. As for the other performances, again, I thought they were good across the board. We had Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez, and we got to see her kind of hot and cold relationship with Bob Dylan throughout the movie. But outside of Timothee Chalamet, I think my favorite performance in this film came from Edward Norton as Pete Seeger. I thought he did a really good job, and I actually didn't know he was in this movie until I went to see it, so it was a nice surprise to see him on the big screen again. Next up for the good is the music. Now, I rarely, and I mean rarely, ever listen to folk music. I know next to nothing about it, but I have to say, I might have to start listening to it after watching this movie, because it wasn't half bad. The musical performances, in my opinion, were the best part of the movie, especially when we got to the end and we got that rock performance from Bob Dylan. And I was actually kind of shocked at the amount of music that we got in this as well. And I know that sounds kind of dumb because this is a movie about a famous musician at the end of the day. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to see this movie just to hear Bob Dylan's music and folk music, then you are going to get that and then some. I am by no means a musical savant of any kind, but I like to think I can recognize good music when I hear it, and that is what this movie has. And finally, for the good, is that this movie does a really good job at just transporting you into its time period. I mean, when you're watching this, you truly feel like you've been transported into the 60s. They did a great job at recreating the world that Bob Dylan lived in, and it was just really cool to see what the folk music community was like and how that slowly transitioned and blended with rock because of Bob Dylan. They really immersed you in this time period with everything that was going on, and did a great job at showing not only how folk music and rock music affected the culture, but also specifically how Bob Dylan's music affected the culture. And from someone who doesn't really know anything about Bob Dylan or folk music in general, it was really cool to learn about that. Moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I have here is that I wish this movie did a little bit of a better job at just showing the passage of time, especially in the beginning, because once we got to the end of the movie, we knew how much time had passed. I think it was like 5 to 6 years or something like that. But in the beginning, when they were going through some of the events in Bob Dylan's life, it was really tough to tell the passage of time between those events. So it kind of felt like right there in the beginning, this thing was jumping around a bit for a second. I mean, right there in the beginning of the film, we see Bob Dylan play on stage for the first time, and then it looks like there's a little bit of a time jump, and now he's signed to a label and he meets Sylvie, and then there's another little bit of a time jump, and now they're all of a sudden moved in together. So a lot happened in a short period of time, and I just wish there was like a timestamp or something just to tell us how much time had passed between him playing on stage for the first time to finally signing with a label and then meeting and moving in with Sylvie. At the end of the day, at least in my opinion, I think that just would have helped with the overall flow of the movie right there in the beginning, because to me it did feel a little bit choppy right there at the start, just because we didn't know how much time was passing during these events. And then about halfway through the movie, we do finally get our first timestamp, and that did help me out tremendously, just knowing where we were at in time. And finally getting into the bad, and I only have one little minor thing here, and that is that even though I did enjoy this movie all the way through, I did feel that runtime just a little bit. This thing is 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and it very much fills that 2 hour and 20 minute runtime. Now, I know that biopics tend to be longer movies, but with this film's slower pace, it just feels like at times it's a little bit longer than it needs to be. But overall, I do think this movie still deserves its praise. It's got great performances, some good music, and tells a solid story about an important time in folk music. It's in my top 15 for 2024 movies, and it's definitely worth the watch. Those are my thoughts on A Complete Unknown. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.